And we are streaming. Elena. Come on. Greetings. We're back in the bed at Mino Manor. Reading a book recommended by Valerie. And Harry. Tove Janssen's Tales from Moominvalley. There are illustrations that I will not be sharing because I'm greedy. And I'm going to drink them all in with my eyes. I'm also not going to go through the characters in the Moomin Gallery because there's too many of them. And we'll learn them as we go. And we'll get voices that don't apply to them because we don't know the characters. It's brand new. And the first story in this book, I'm going to put up the volume. First story in this book is the Spring Tune. Tune. No, Tune. Like a loony tune. One calm and cloudless evening toward the end of April, Snufkin found himself far enough to the north to see still unmelted patches of snow on the northern slopes. He had been walking all day through undisturbed landscapes, listening to the cries of the birds. Quack! Also on their way northward, home from the south. Walking had been easy because his knapsack was nearly empty and he had no worries on his mind. He felt happy about the wood and the weather, and himself. Tomorrow and yesterday were both at a distance, and just at present the sun was shining brightly red between the birches, and the air was cool, man, and soft. Let's see. Snufkin's doing some thinking. I'm going to look up what Snufkin... What kind of character is Snufkin?
Is he a dad? Because then he could do the dad voice.
He is a vagabond, a musician, and he is Moomin Troll's best friend. So he is... I mean, he is a...
He's a dad. Surfer dad.
He could be a jazz man.
No, do surfer dad.
Surfer dad, okay. It's the right evening for a tune, Snufkin thought. A new tune. 1 part expectation, 2 parts spring sadness, and for the rest, just the great delight of walking alone and liking it. He had kept his tune under his hat for several days, but he hadn't quite dared to take it out yet. Zip. It had to grow into a kind of happy conviction. Then he would simply have to put his lips to the mouth organ.
Oh my.
And all the notes would jump instantly into their places. If he released them too soon, they might get stuck crossways and make only a half-good tune. Or he might lose them altogether and never be in the right mood to get hold of them again. Tunes are serious things, especially if they have to be jolly and sad at the same time. But this evening, Snufkin felt rather sure of his tune. It was there, waiting, nearly full-grown, and it was going to be the best he had ever made. Then, when he arrived in Moominvalley, he'd sit on the bridge rail and play it, and Moomin Troll would say at once, "Oh no, what? Moomin Troll is going to say something."
Anne. Make it like an Anne voice.
Well, the description of Moomin Troll, just in case there might be a better Anne. Moomin Troll is, well, it's a boy, but it can still be Anne.
My Anne.
As gullible as he is enthusiastic, he is also naive and extremely good-natured. He has a lady friend. But
Maybe a Wilbur voice.
Okay. So the Snork Maiden is Moomin Troll's girlfriend.
That can be an Anne.
She is occupied with romantic fantasies.
What's fancy?
Moomin Troll would say at once. Wait, what voice is he?
Wilbur.
That's a good one. Really a good one. Snufkin stopped in his tracks, feeling just a little bit uneasy. Yes, Moomin Troll, always waiting and longing. Moomin Troll, who sat at home, who waited for him and admired him, and who always told him, "Of course you have to feel free. Naturally, you must go away. I do understand you have to be alone at times." And all the while his eyes were black with disappointment, and no one could help it. "Oh my, oh my," Snufkin said to himself, and continued on his way. My, oh my. He's got such a lot of feelings. This Moomin Troll. I won't think of him now. He's a splendid Moomin. But I don't have to think of him now. Tonight, I'm alone with
I
my
like
tune.
that this guy has also been John Arable and also Danny's father and also John Fitzgerald Sr. and also the King Cobb or the Senior Cobb from Trumpet and Swan.
I was a big old cob.
He was been everything. His voice has traveled.
This voice gets a lot of play.
It's a good one.
Tonight, I'm alone with my tune, and tonight isn't tomorrow. In a little while, Snufkin had managed to forget all about Moomin Troll. He was sniffing around for a good place to camp in. And when he heard a brook a bit farther on in the wood, he went toward the sound. The last red ray of sunlight had vanished between the birches. Now came the spring twilight, slow and blue. All the wood was changed, and the white pillars of the birches went wandering farther and farther off in the blue dusk. The brook was a good one. It went rushing clear and brown
Ew.
over wads
No.
of last year's leaves,
No.
through small tunnels of leftover ice, swerving through the green moss and throwing itself headlong down in a small waterfall onto a white sand bottom.
Oh no.
Bottle.
Puddle.
In places it droned sharp as a mosquito. Then it tried to sound great and menacing, stopped, gurgled with a mouthful of melted snow, and laughed at it all. Ho, ho, ho. Snufkin stood listening in the damp moss. I must have the brook in my tune also. Not two. I can't say two right after tune, he thought.
Tommy Tune.
In the refrain, I think. A small stone suddenly came loose near the waterfall and raised the pitch of the brook a whole octave. Oh, not bad, Snufkin said admiringly. That's the way to do it. A sudden change just in passing. I'll have to find that brook a tune of its own. He took out his old saucepan and filled it from the waterfall. Then he went in under the firs to look for firewood. The ground was still wet from the spring thaw and the rains, and Snufkin had to crawl far under a brambly windfall to find any dry sticks. When he reached out, someone gave a sudden shout and flashed past him and off among the firs, still crying and squeaking all the way. Oh, yes, Snufkin said. Creeps and woodies everywhere. Funny how nervous they always seem to be. The smaller, the jumpier. He found a dried stump and some sticks and built himself a good campfire by the brook. Snufkin was used to cooking his own dinner. He never cooked a dinner for other people if he could avoid it, nor did he care much for other people's dinners. So many people insisted on talking when they had a meal. Also, they had a great liking for chairs and tables. Some of them used napkins.
No.
He even had heard of a Hermulen who changed his clothes every time he was about to eat. But that was probably slander. A little distractedly, Snufkin ate his meager soup while he rested his eyes on the green moss by the birches. The tune was quite near at hand, easy to catch by the tail, but there was time enough to wait. It was hedged in and couldn't get away. No, better to wash the dishes first, then light a pipe. And afterwards, when the campfire was burning down and the night creatures started calling for each other, then he'd have it.
Yeah.
Snufkin was washing his saucepan in the brook when he caught sight of the creep.
Creepin'.
It was sitting on the far side below a tree root, looking at him. Its eyes were scared, but very interested, following Snufkin's every movement. Two shy eyes under a mop of hair. Just the look people have who were never noticed. Snufkin pretended he hadn't seen the creep. He raked up his fire and cut himself
What?
some fir twigs to sit on. He took out his pipe and lit it. He puffed a few clouds of smoke toward the night sky and waited for the springtime. It didn't come. Instead, he felt the creep's eyes upon him. They watched everything he did admiringly. and he began to feel uneasy once more. He clapped his
Cheeks.
paws together and shouted, "Shoo! Be off!" At this, the creep slunk out from under the tree root, it was still on the other side of the brook, and said very shyly, oh, let's learn about the creep.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the down low.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what a creep sounds like.
Make it a tiny voice.
I could do Ren from Ren and Stimpy.
No, do a tiny voice.
Okay.
Like the mice from Christmas Carol.
Okay. Said very shyly, "I hope I haven't scared you. I know who you are. You're Snufkin." And then the creep stepped straight into the water, splash, and started to wade across. The brook was rather too broad for it, and the water was ice cold. Shrinkage.
Oh no.
A couple of times the creep lost its foothold and tumbled over. Ugh. But Snufkin was feeling so uneasy that he simply didn't think of giving it a hand.
Oh.
Finally, a rather thin and miserable creep crawled ashore and said with chattering teeth, "Hello, I'm so happy to meet you." "Hello," Snufkin answered, equally coldly. "May I warm myself by your fire?" the creep continued, its wet little face shining with happiness. "Just think of it. Then I'll be the creep who is sat by Snufkin's campfire. I'll never forget that." The creep edged closer, laid one paw on Snufkin's knapsack, and solemnly whispered, "Is this where you keep the mouth organ? Do you have it here?" "Yes," Snufkin said rather crossly. His tune was lost. Loneliness was gone. All was different. He clenched his teeth around the pipe stem and stared in among the birches without really seeing them. "Now, don't mind me," the creep said innocently. "In case you'd like to play, I mean. You'd never guess how I long for a little music. I've never heard any, but I've heard about you, the hedgehog, and Toffle, and my mother. They all told me. Toffle even seen you once. Yeah, you can't imagine. Nothing much ever happens here, but we dream lots and lots." "Well, what's your name?" Snufkin asked. The evening was spoiled anyway, so he thought it easier to talk. "I'm so small, I haven't got a name,"
Wow.
the creep said eagerly. "As a matter of fact, nobody's ever asked me about it before. And then I meet you, whom I've heard so much about and always longed to see. And the first thing you ask me is what my name is. Do you think perhaps
This is a Davy Ann.
you might? I mean, would it be a lot of trouble for you to think up a name for me? A name that would be only mine and no one else would ever have it. Now, tonight." Snufkin mumbled something, and pulled his hat over his eyes. Someone flew across the brook on long pointed wings and gave a long, sad cry among the trees. "Yoo-hoo, yo, yoo, yo, ti-woo." "You can't ever really be free if you admire somebody too much," Snufkin suddenly said. "I know." "I know you know everything," the little creep prattled on, edging
Oh no.
closer still. "I know you've seen everything. You're right in everything you say. And I'll always try to become as free as you are. So Now you're on your way to Moominvalley to have a rest and meet your friends. The hedgehog told me that Moomin Troll starts waiting for you as soon as he wakes from winter sleep. Isn't it a nice thing to know someone's longing for you and waiting to see you again? I'm coming when it suits me, Snufkin cried violently. Perhaps I shan't come at all. Perhaps I will go somewhere else. Oh, then he'll be sad. Its fur was beginning to dry and becoming light brown and soft. It picked at the knapsack once again and asked cautiously, Would you, perhaps, you who have traveled so much? No, Snufkin said, and he thought angrily, Why can't they ever let my wanderings alone? Can't they understand that I'll talk it all to pieces if I have to tell about it? Then it's gone, and when I try to remember what it was really like, I remember only my own story. There was a long silence, and the night bird cried again. Yoo-hoo-dee-woo. The creep rose and said in a small voice, Well, I must be off, I think. Cheerio. Cheerio, Snufkin said, fidgeting a little. Listen, the name you asked for. What about Tootie-woo? For instance, Tootie-woo. Don't you see? A light beginning sort of and a little sadness to round it off. Tootie-woo. Mr. Titties.
Mr. Titties. You should be so lucky.
How about Prince Peach?
Mr. Titties.
The little creep stared at him with yellow eyes in the firelight. It thought its name over, tasted it, listened to it, crawled inside it, and finally turned its nose to the sky and softly howled its new name. So sadly and ecstatically that Snufkin felt a shiver along his back. Oh, a soupir. Then a brown tail disappeared in the brambles, and all was silent. Golly, Snufkin said, and kicked at an ember. He rapped out his pipe. Then he rose and shouted, Hello, come back! But the wood was silent. Oh, well, Snufkin thought. You can't always be friendly. It's impossible. There isn't the time. And at least this creep has got a name. He sat down again and listened to the brook and the silence and waited for his tune to come back. But it didn't come. He knew at once. It had moved too far away to be caught. Perhaps he'd never catch it. The only thing he seemed to hear was the eager and shy voice of the creep. Yeah. Talking and talking and talking. Why don't they keep at home with their mothers? Snufkin said crossly and threw himself on his back onto the fir twigs. After a while he sat up and shouted once more. He listened for a long time. Then he pulled his hat over his nose and went to sleep. I'm going to stop there because I'm tired. And it's almost midnight. On New Year's Eve, almost. Page 13 is where we will return to the tales from Moominvalley. Even though I guess they're not in Moominvalley right now. Tales near Moominvalley. Moominchance. Goodbye.